Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our Friday panel on a demand for MLAs to state their position on separation. But first, First Nations prepared to push back.
That means everything. That means stopping industry. That means maybe going out on the highways. That maybe means doing what we need to do to be heard.
We support responsible development, and we've said that numerous times. But if it's going to come to an attack on our treaty, we're going to do everything we can to protect our people.
Chiefs of Treaty 8 First Nations say they have lost trust in the UCP government and, in an open letter, demand the Premier cease any attempt to proceed with a separation referendum or related process without full consultation and consent from Treaty 8 First Nations. A statement from the Premier's office denies the referendum question triggers any duty to consult. Joining us now, Matthew Wildcat, Director of Indigenous Governance and Partnership at the University of Alberta and a member of the Ermineskin Cree Nation. Matthew, good to see you, sir.
Yeah, glad to be back in studio.
Good to have you. The frustration we just heard being expressed there by Treaty 8 chiefs, the willingness to explore every option possible to push back. What does that reaction speak to where this whole separation issue is concerned?
Yeah, so it speaks to certainly trust being at very, very low levels, and that was also spoken to in the press conference as well. But I think really, that this idea of everything is on the table is Chief McCurdy, the Grand Chief, earlier in the press conference said, the Premier is acting unlawfully, and she's acting unlawfully because she refuses to engage and respect treaty rights in any sort of minimum way. And so if the Premier is acting unlawfully, what that means is then as Treaty 8 First Nations, they have to explore all the avenues available to them. And so, one of the other things he said is, if a referendum goes forward, that they'll be encouraging their members to vote. Right? And so, when he talks about all avenues, it could be like encouraging members to vote to the potential for blockades. So,
Manitoba Premier Bob Sumner, his criticism of Danielle Smith at the recent Western Premiers Conference in Kananaskis, how much of a turning point is that in this whole conversation around this issue of duty to consult?
I think it is a real kind of bellwether moment. It's something we can almost kind of reference back to of these competing interpretations, right? And so Section 35 is quite short, actually. It just says the Aboriginal and Treaty Canada recognizes existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people, and so. It requires interpretation, right? It requires ongoing negotiation, dialogue back and forth to figure out what all of that means. And so I think one of the really big things that I want to point out with the duty to consult is the duty to consult only arises in cases where there's the potential or real infringement upon Aboriginal or treaty rights, or, upon Section 35 rights. If there is a full respect for treaty rights, the duty to consult does not apply because treaty rights are being respected. There's no need to have a dialogue to trigger these consultations, right? And to go and seek First Nation consent. It exists because treaty rights are going to be infringed upon or abrogated in some sort of way, and it requires a discussion around how that can be mitigated or needs to be avoided. But at the end of the day, the government still reserves to itself the right to infringe upon Aboriginal rights in the basis of the national interest.
I want to speak to your column in the Globe and Mail this week.
Absolutely, yeah.
You wrote that now is the time for First Nations to build a political strategy. By that, do you mean take a more active role in the provincial government dynamic?
Right now, what First Nations have been very effective at pursuing is press releases. So we've had, by my count, I have a folder on my computer, at least 35 press releases over the last year. So 47 of 48 chief and councils in the province have spoken out against Alberta separation in a public way. So, kind of overwhelming support. There's also been a number of lawsuits. By politics, I mean the question of political power and negotiation, right, and dialogue. And so when I talk about First Nations pursuing a political strategy, it is entering into those realms of dialogue and talk. But for me, that is just as important to have an inter-Indigenous politics, where we pursue multilateral communication to advance goals, as much as it is speaking with the provincial government.
And how do you formalize that? What shape does that take?
It could take a bunch of different shapes. The chiefs have passed motions in the past, but I think something which would be a bit more weighty and substantive would be the possibility of having a treaty commission. In Saskatchewan, right next door, they have a permanent office of the treaty commissioner, and it's been something which has seen in that province permanent curriculum around treaties in that province's education system. I'm not envisioning necessarily a permanent treaty office, but I think just a one-time treaty commission to explore the situation that we're confronted with. And I think Indigenous people's understandings of treaty give a form of reasoning which teach us how to live together in this current moment of, where we're trying to figure out some difficult issues.
And there would be, you see unity in that regard. So would someone need to step forward and take the lead on that?
I'm drafting right now, thinking about how it might take place. There's the AOTC, which could organize it. There's also the Assembly of First Nations. The treaty offices themselves could come together and organize it. But I think the first point would be you have to get a committee together to explore, okay, what would be the terms of a commission? What would be its mandate? What is the question it's going to explore? And any sub-questions like, should there be a permanent treaty office, right? And then once you have a framework in place, then you can bring it back to the chiefs. They can discuss, amend it as they see fit, and they could strike, if they wanted to, through ratifying in a vote, a treaty commission to go explore on their behalf.
You mentioned AFN a moment ago.
Yes.
Cindy Woodhouse-Nepanak,
yes.
who is national chief for the Assembly of First Nations. She led a delegation to Buckingham Palace earlier this week to speak to the King about that. How much of a role does that relationship play moving forward?
The treaties are sacred documents, right? They were signed to allow people to share the land together, and Indigenous people's understanding of that is that it's meant to ensure mutual flourishing on both parties, and so the original signatory of those treaties is the British Crown, and so Indigenous peoples are and First Nation people from treaty areas, the number treaties, hold the Crown with very high regard because that is who the partnership is with. And then Canada now exercises many of those rights that were, that relationship that was made with the Crown. But the original, the foundation of that being with the British Crown is still fundamental in people's understanding of treaty.
One more quick question for you.
Yes.
All of this is based around Albertans deciding at some point whether or not the province should leave Canada. But
Yes.
how much of this conversation is about Indigenous sovereignty?
So the First Nations of Treaty 8 were really good in their opening line. So Treaty 8 was signed in 1899, predates the creation of the province of Alberta by 7 years. And they said simply, Alberta is subject to treaties, not above them, right? And so I think ultimately, there can be no talk of secession without focusing on Indigenous people's sovereignty and without focusing on treaty agreements. And so I think I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
All right. Good to have you back in studio.
Awesome.
Thanks kindly, Matthew.
Okay, thanks so much.
From pressure to take a referendum position to Ottawa's new AI strategy, gauging the impact of Alberta's rainy week, and Canadian soccer fans gearing up for the World Cup. Our Primetime This Week panel is in, and joining us this evening, Alex Boyd, Alberta-based national reporter for the Toronto Star, and Bob Sumner, former 30-year news veteran, now a media and communications consultant. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with a call for clarity.
Every single UCP MLA needs to say publicly and unequivocally which option they will be voting for on October 19th.
According to the opposition, only 10 UCP MLAs have so far stated publicly they will vote to remain in Canada, while 36 others have still not stated their referendum voting intentions.
Why are they sitting on the fence on the most fundamental question our province is facing, the one that they themselves have forced on Albertans? It's either because they're separatists, or because they've made the political calculation that they would lose their UCP nomination or their seat if they publicly stated their support for remaining in Canada.
When asked about UCP MLAs publicly stating their voting intentions, Chief Government Whip Brennan Lundy reiterated in a statement that the UCP caucus supports a strong and sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. Alex, is that often repeated statement enough to satisfy constituents who want to know where their MLA stands?
You know, I don't know that it's going to be for a lot of people. You know, it's an interesting conversation because there's obviously lots of issues where we don't expect MLAs to, you know, publicize their personal views on things. Rather, we just accept that they will go with what the government wants. But, you know, this is a unique issue. It could be transformative for our province. And it also was not an issue that was an election issue last time people were able to go to the ballot and vote for, you know, who they wanted to be their MLA. So it wasn't something people were able to consider. It wasn't something people are able to vote on. There's also been at least one MLA, I believe it was Red Deer's Jason Stephen, who wrote an op-ed, you know, speaking very favorably about the petition to go forward with a referendum. So there are questions about what their personal beliefs are and whether or not they're potentially out of step with polling data, which suggests that this is not a particularly popular idea across Alberta. So, you know, again, I understand why people are curious this time around, and it feels like a very fair question to me.
Well, and I'll pose it to you, Bob. Is there a need to know where every elected member stands? Or in the case of the UCP, is it enough for the Premier to say her caucus and her party support Alberta remaining in Canada?
Yeah, well, that's all well and good that Daniel says that, the Premier says that, but I think it's time that they all stand up, because we're going to find out when the vote happens the way the vote went. But I think they should let everybody know where they're standing on this. It's like a dangerous situation. They need to stand up, I think, and just let it all out, because sooner or later we're going to find out.
All right. Next up for us, Ottawa's new AI strategy and the impact it could have in our province. Under the banner of AI for All, the government's plan is to boost business use from 12% now to 60% by 2034. A supercomputer will also be built to increase Canada's sovereign infrastructure, and there will be free access to AI literacy training.
Under our strategy, the government will introduce new legislation, regulations and standards to protect your data, your privacy, your children.
Billions will also be pumped into the AI space. Welcome news for tech companies like Calgary's BrainToy.
We partner with educational institutions and industries. We want to empower people. So this will be good because it will provide funding and some capital to do this.
While there is excitement, some experts are urging a second look.
Let's have a conversation about accountability when AI systems cause harms, and also individual rights and liberties. If I don't want my data to be used for training, especially in governmental context.
Angus Reid polling shows nearly 2/3 of Canadians want AI regulated, while nearly 3/4 are not confident in the government keeping up with the technology. Bob, how warranted is the investment the federal government appears willing to put up here? What kind of foundation do you see this building where the betterment of Canadians is concerned?
Well, and I heard a report that Canada is way behind on AI, so maybe it is time we catch up. But I think you have to have all the safeguards in place. There's a lot of issues with these data centers and water use. So I think there's a long way to go, but if we need to catch up, then I guess it's time we should. Just make sure that everyone's privacy is protected if that's possible.
Well, and Alex, on that point of privacy, many Albertans are rightfully rattled over the massive data breach involving a separatist group posting personal information from the voters list. How trusting do you think we as Canadians are of AI and where privacy protection is concerned?
I mean, that I think is set to go down as one of the biggest privacy breaches seen potentially, you know, in this country. And so, you know, I don't think it was necessarily related to AI. It seems allegedly to have been a list that was provided to a political party that ended up in hands that it shouldn't have been in. But it certainly, I think, has made people newly alert to the fact that this is an issue, that they need to be careful about where their data is and what the potential is when something can go very wrong. So, you know, even though it's it's not, related to AI necessarily. I think the fact that, it's coming so quickly before some of these conversations about AI and privacy, it does seem likely to inform that conversation because people, have just had, this big flashing example of why online privacy is something they should be paying attention to.
Alex, do you see the guardrails necessary there for with what the government is bringing forward?
I mean, I think that's the question. I mean, I think a lot of tech companies, a lot of folks who are excited about AI, are glad to see this kind of money. But that is the lingering questions that I'm hearing is that, is this something that we're regulating enough? Is this something that we're being careful about enough? Because, I think what really bothers people sometimes is this air of inevitability, this idea that AI is here, we can't stop it, we're all going to accept it. I think, it does have a lot of a potential and it speaks to the need for training. But there's a lot of people who would like to make sure that, it doesn't just steamroll us and we make sure that we have the protections in place to make sure, that it's not just running amok.
Bob, whether it's this issue of privacy, guardrails around privacy, or what do you think scares us most about AI? Could it be to do with the security of our employment?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've all seen it in our industry how technology has changed and eliminated a lot of jobs, but I mean, that's just progress. But I mean, with AI, it's going to replace a lot of jobs, but then I guess it's up to us to figure out what are we going to do to, advance and adapt to the new world that we're living in, because it's coming and it's not going to stop. So we'll have to figure out. Luckily, I'm at the end of my journey is almost over. But the younger generations, they're going to have to figure out a way to fit into the workforce somehow.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break, but when we come back, Albertans weathering the rainy conditions and a flood of excitement ahead of the World Cup. More from our Primetime This Week panel in a moment. Welcome back. Steady rain through much of the province this week brought flashbacks to the 2013 floods for some and close calls for others. Case in point, a sudden rock slide happening on Spray Lakes Road, just 50 meters in front of visitors from the Maritimes returning to Canmore.
This rock from the ledge just came tumbling down. We sit there and think like, oh my goodness, what if we took one less picture or just the time, you never know, right?
Now, down in the valley, others were dealing with the aftermath of steady rain, including businesses with flooded basements.
The biggest damage was the loss of 2 days, 2 days of revenue. The staff won't be getting hours for those 2 days.
Downstream from the mountains, the Bow River running high through the week.
It's close to peak in the Calgary area, just over 400 cubic meters per second. And might go a little bit higher, but it's, again, far lower than the peaks that occurred in 2013.
Welcome news to many Calgarians.
I wasn't out when it was pouring rain. Thank goodness I didn't have to go out.
Definitely enjoy it more without rain because I like walking outside during my lunchtime.
Now, some pathways remain closed through the week while monitoring continued for erosion and maybe damage to bridges as well. Now, Alex, and I should point out, you both are in Calgary, but are residents of southern Alberta breathing something of a sigh of relief this many years after the big one?
I think so. I am in Calgary, so I'm one of many people that had to reroute my, morning dog walk this morning because so many of the paths close to the river are still flooded. But I do think there is kind of a sense of relief. Anytime it, starts raining that hard this time of year, people start, feeling a little bit antsy, particularly if they were around in 2013. To be clear, as we just heard, this wasn't the same magnitude as 2013, but it's hard not to start thinking that way when you start seeing the river rising. We are in a different situation than we were in 2013. It's helpful to remember that after that last big flood, a lot of, governments looked around and said, okay, how do we do this differently? And so there's all sorts of flood mitigation infrastructure now now that we didn't have then. But at the same time, because of climate change, these sort of extreme weather events are now becoming more common. And even what, a 20-year flood or a 50-year flood, was considered then is different now. And so, these unfortunately, seem to be continue to be part of our reality.
So, Bob, how much of a sign is this that the region is maybe better prepared for the threat of repeat flooding?
Oh, yeah, definitely better prepared. The city of Calgary itself has put up berms all along the Bow River to make sure water doesn't breach. I heard my buddy Mayor Snodgrass down in High River talking about they could handle way more water. They don't want to, but they're prepared for like massive amounts of water down there. And even further south, I saw a little bit of concern around Look River. But everyone is we always look to the skies this time of year and to the west. There's all sorts of stories on snowpack and warm weather and rain combinations. So I guess maybe we are a little bit smarter than 2013.
All right. Rain this week did not dampen the spirit of soccer fans.
Osorio drives it in. Jonathan Osorio with the goal to give Canada the lead in Edmonton.
More than 46,000 braved the weather to see Canada win an international friendly over Uzbekistan, a warm-up ahead of the start of the FIFA World Cup next week.
Well, it's about time because we're always hockey and football and no soccer, right? Now finally it's spreading out.
With Canada co-hosting the World Cup for the first time, longtime soccer fans are glad to see support for the game growing on home soil.
It's amazing being able to actually experience it in North America. I didn't think it was ever going to happen, especially in my lifetime.
And for some, it means getting behind more than one team.
Cheering for the Democratic Republic of Congo, that's my country of origin, and of course the country that hosts me now, Canada.
Mexican. both Mexico and Canada.
Mm-hmm. The World Cup kicks off June 11th with Canada's first match next Friday against Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bob, how invested are you in hype around the World Cup? Is this one of those sporting events that will be capturing your attention?
I have to be honest and say, no, probably not. But it's just not my sport. But you can see the excitement. I know some friends that went up to Edmonton to watch the game, and you can just feel it around. That there's a lot of soccer/football fans in this city and country. And I think that they will really support this because it's like world-class athletes competing at a very high level. So I think it's going to be a great success. It's just not for me. But I hope everyone has fun.
Alex, we've talked sports before. No, you're not an uber sports fan, but what is your hope for the World Cup and what it might bring to Canada as one of the three host nations?
Yeah, I mean, my stance on sports generally has not changed. I got to say, I do, sometimes get into World Cup. It is kind of fun because it is, much more of a global thing and more of a kind of a cultural phenomenon than sometimes the other sports that are on offer locally. But, one thing I think I'm going to be watching is whether or not the economic impact actually comes to fruition. Because one of the reasons that this is often sold to host cities and host countries is this idea that it's going to pour all sorts of money into your local economy. And so all of the money that you're going to be spending on hosting people and upgrading facilities is going to come back to you. And I think, there's still kind of an open question about what these games will actually mean for the cities here in Canada that are hosting. It's one of the first times that they've been this spread out. These are very expensive cities that would be looking to host tourists anyway. So, there's been lots of reporting about how, like in places like Vancouver, even a couple weeks ago, hotel bookings were down over last year. So I think there's a real question about whether or not, all of the money that they've put into hosting these things is actually going to turn into tourism dollars or turn into advertising dollars for the city. So that's one of my questions that I'll be watching.
Indeed. Okay, we're out of time. Have to leave it there. Have a great weekend, and thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Now, here are a few responses to a story posted by CTV News about First Nations exploring every avenue to stop the Alberta separation referendum question. The captain says they can vote individually as citizens, just like every Albertan. Phil notes that it's a non-binding question on the ballot. Let's see the results. And Donna just wants everyone to relax and don't let Alberta get you going, adding it will never separate. Remember, you can always have a say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. That is our program for tonight. Have a great evening and a great weekend, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.